Let's talk about some of the traps that are set for avatars here on Earth. The purpose of these traps is, of course, to prevent us from doing what we came here to do. And that is primarily to be a counterbalance to the fallen beings and to be also instrumental in getting the fallen beings off the planet and pulling the planet up to a higher level of collective consciousness, where the original inhabitants of the Earth will choose to transcend, to leave behind some of these manifestations that are happening right now. So naturally, who is it that has set these traps for us? Well, of course, the fallen beings. And I just want to briefly talk about this, why it's so important for avatars to understand what the fallen beings are and what they are going to do to us. And I have met, as I mentioned before, many spiritual people who don't want to hear about anything evil, anything dark. And obviously, if you were in that category, you wouldn't be watching this. But still, why is it so important to know about fallen beings when you are an avatar? Well, basically because you can't understand what's happening on Earth if you don't understand about fallen beings. Let me just give you an example. So when I was about 10 years old, I would often be home alone after school and before my parents came home from work. So I would sit there in the living room and I would read books. And my mother had this big book about 50 world events, 50 defining world events. And I would sometimes be reading this. And I still remember one day leafing through the book and I came across these pictures of some camps with buildings and some people who were wearing these striped suits, black and white suits, and they were so skinny that you could almost see their bones through their skin. And it was, of course, the story of the Holocaust and the concentration camps. And I still remember how shocked I was when I realized that this had happened. And it was again this kind of reaction like, how could I be on a planet where this could happen? And I just couldn't understand it. And it was not so much the outer acts, it was the consciousness behind it. And what I really couldn't grasp was this total disregard for human life, the value of human life. It was like a total insensitivity. I didn't even at the time see these people as Jews, because growing up in Denmark, Jews was not an issue. I mean, we didn't in any way single out Jews as any particular group in society. But I saw them as human beings, and the fact that this was done to human beings, it showed me that there must be people who had this complete insensitivity to life. And I could not grasp that. I couldn't understand how this could be happening. I mean, I know that people can do some strange things, but still this was at a level of insensitivity that it was unfathomable to me. I mean, I could not imagine myself doing something like this to human beings. And so then this became a question in my mind, of course. How could this happen? How could this take place? What was behind it? And I was looking for answers, and as I got a little older and got into my teens, you learn things in school, you read books, and then you come across this idea that evil is part of human nature. In other words, all human beings have it as a potential in their psychology to become evil and do evil acts. And as an avatar, I was always very willing to look at myself. Even as a child, I was always looking at myself, my own reactions. How could I improve? What could I do better? And I always had this sense there are certain things I just will not do, won't allow me to do, like be cruel to other children or those kind of things. So I was really disturbed by this because I thought, is it really true? Is it really true that in my nature is the potential to do something like this? And intuitively I felt it wasn't, because I felt that there were certain things that no matter what you did to me, you couldn't make me do it. You could not make me have this kind of insensitivity to human life. And so, again, I grow up, go through my teens, go into my 20s, And I finally find the Ascended Master teachings. And here I hear about the concept of fallen beings. In my second spiritual movement, they were called fallen angels. But I don't want to go into that whole discussion now. But the idea was that there were some beings that had fallen, and therefore they didn't look at life or look at human beings, especially the way we normally do. This helped me to some degree start processing this. But it wasn't really until I later received these teachings from the Ascended Masters about avatars and fallen beings and the whole dynamic that I really started understanding what's going on. And when I did this, and when I realized I was an avatar, I realized that there is actually a fundamental difference between fallen beings, human beings, and avatars. And it's simply not true that evil is a potential of human nature. I remember Mother Teresa said that we all have a little Hitler inside of us. And my reaction was, maybe you do, but I have looked very deeply into my own psychology and I haven't seen a Hitler inside of me. And I think it's the same is true for all avatars. I mean, we just don't have that potential because we come to this planet with some sense of the connectedness, the oneness of all life. So what am I saying? I'm saying that if you look at Germany in the 1930s, of course, the leader was always Hitler. In growing up in Denmark, you learned a lot about Hitler. And so you can say, well, the German people, they did support Hitler, didn't they? So doesn't that prove that there is that potential? And it actually doesn't, because first of all, many Germans didn't really grasp what was happening with the Holocaust. Some of the camps, the most notorious camps, were in Poland. But still, people didn't really understand what was going on. And the other thing is, you can say, okay, so you can get a population to support this. But that doesn't mean you could have gotten them to come up with the idea and the planning and a decision to do it. They could support it because they didn't really understand what was going on. They were affected by the propaganda, but they would never have come up with the idea on their own. So this was resolved by knowing about fallen beings. You're realizing that the beings who can come up with these kind of schemes that are so completely insensitive, have such complete disrespect for human life, it's only the fallen beings who could come up with this. And why? Because they have no respect for any form of life except their own. They have no respect for human beings. It was shocking to me, and it took me a while to realize that for fallen beings to, for example, initiate the Holocaust and kill 6 million people, they had no more emotional reaction to it as I would have to moving pieces around on a chessboard. They had an agenda. And part of that agenda was creating these camps and killing as many people as possible. But they had no more emotional reaction to it than moving around pieces on a chessboard. And human beings can't have that kind of disrespect for human life. See, fallen beings have it because they don't see themselves as human beings. You can, if you actually really look into some of the fallen beings we've seen in history, Hitler, Stalin, Mao, you can see that they were willing to kill millions of their own citizens. But they didn't see them as their own citizens. This is what fools us. A fallen being in embodiment looks like any other human being. Right? You're thinking, well, Hitler has 2 ears and 2 eyes and a nose just like me, so he's a human being. But he's not. He was not. No, they are not human beings. They don't see themselves as human beings. You look at their psychology, they saw themselves as fundamentally superior to human beings. And they had a right to do whatever they wanted, regardless of the consequences. In fact, they had a right to do what they thought had to be done without even considering the consequences and the suffering it caused for human beings. And Human beings, of course, see themselves and each other as human beings. So they couldn't do this. They could be fooled or pressured into supporting it if they didn't fully understand what was going on, but they would never initiate it. And avatars, of course, you could say, well, what could we be pulled into doing? And this relates to the topic of the traps. What could the fallen beings pull us into doing?